Welcome to Value Plays Only, where Lion's Eye Diamond is just a reverse Thoughtseize. Today we have Dan playing Najeela, the Blade Blossom. This 5-color good stuff pile is packed full of wins. In addition to Najeela specific combos like Derevi and Grim Hireling, it can win with Thassa's Oracle or Underworld Breach. His hand contains Noble Hierarch, Summoner's Pact, Underworld Breach, Savine's Reclamation, Windswept Heath, and Flooded Strand. His Luna Mulligan is a Gilded Drake. Cammy is playing Winota, Joiner of Forces. This deck is packed to the brim with creatures. It looks to stacks out the board while cheating in massive combat threats. Her hand contains a Rite of Flame, Swords to Plowshares, Inkmoth Nexus, Bloodstained Mire, Wooded Foothills, and a Plains. Her Luna Mulligan is Rionya Fire Dancer. John is playing Omnath, Locus of Creation. This Sands Black combo deck is looking to use Omnath's landfall ability to make explosive pushes of mana. It can win with Food Chain or Underworld Breach. His hand contains Esper Sentinel, Mockingbird, Bloom Tender, The One Ring, Angel's Grace, and Arid Mesa. His Luna Mulligan is Underworld Breach. Tyler's playing Norman Osborne, aka Green Goblin. This is a discard-centric Grixis deck looking to use Green Goblin as a mini Underworld Breach for your discard spells until you can string together a win. His hand contains Gamble, Vampiric Tutor, Mox Amber, Valley Flood Caller, Exotic Orchard, Verdant Catacombs, and Arid Mesa. And with that, let's see some value plays. Dan starts things off with a Windswept Heath, his land for turn. He pays a life and cracks it, fetching up a Taiga. He casts a Noble Hierarch. Dan then passes the turn. Cammy plays a Wooded Foothills as land for turn. She pays a life and cracks it, fetching up a Plateau. Cammy casts a Serra Ascendant. The two Ad Nauseam players exchange worried glances and start pointing fingers at each other. Serra Ascendant resolves, and Cammy passes the turn. John plays an Arid Mesa as land for turn. He pays a life and cracks it, fetching up a Plateau. He casts an Esper Sentinel and passes the turn. Tyler plays a Verdant Catacombs as land for turn. He laments turn order as he stares disapprovingly at the Esper Sentinel. Tyler opts to just pass the turn. Dan untaps and draws. He plays a City of Brass as land for turn. He pays 1 to cast his commander, Najeela, the Blade Blossom. Dan passes the turn. Cammy untaps and draws. She plays a Bloodstained Mire as land for turn. She pays life and cracks it, fetching up a Sacred Foundry, tapped. Cammy passes the turn, forgetting she has a massive 6/6 flyer to use. John untaps and draws. He casts a Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer. Making up ground for Cammy, John goes to combat, swinging Esper Sentinel at Tyler. He takes the damage and John passes his turn, missing a land drop. In his end step, Tyler pays a life and cracks his Verdant Catacombs, fetching up an Underground Sea. He casts a Vampiric Tutor. Esper triggers and John draws. Vamp Tutor resolves and Tyler searches up a card to the top of his library, losing 2 life. The turn then moves to Tyler. Tyler untaps and draws. He plays a City of Traders as land for turn. He casts Rhystic Study. Esper triggers and John draws. John shows Tyler a counter and asks if he's willing to compare hands to make sure Tyler doesn't have anything crazy going on. They swap hands and then the Rhystic resolves. Tyler casts a Mox Amber and then passes the turn. Dan untaps and draws. He plays a Bloodstained Mire as land for turn. He pays life and cracks it, fetching up a Scrubland. He goes to combat, swinging Najeela at Tyler. Najeela and Noble Hierarch trigger. Najeela gets +1/+1 and then makes a 1/1 warrior, tapped and attacking Tyler. Tyler takes the damage and Dan passes the turn. Cammy untaps and draws. She plays a Plains as land for turn. Cammy casts Rite of Flame. The table double check that Serra Ascendant's a human as Esper and Rhystic trigger. Tyler and John draw, and Cammy adds 2 red mana. Cammy casts her commander, Winota, Joiner of Forces. Rhystic triggers and Tyler draws. Winota resolves, and Cammy goes to combat. She swings Serra Ascendant at Dan. He takes the damage, and Cammy passes the turn. John untaps and draws. He cries as he still doesn't have another land in hand. He goes to combat swinging Esper and Ragavan at Dan. Dan takes the damage, and Ragavan triggers to make a Treasure in Exile Verdant Catacombs off the top of Dan's library. In his second main phase, John taps out to cast Bloom Tender. Rhystic triggers, and Tyler draws. John then passes the turn, discarding to hand size. Tyler untaps and draws. He floats 2 mana with the City of Traders and then plays Exotic Orchard as land for turn. City Traders triggers to sacrifice itself. He casts Valley Flood Caller. Tyler then passes the turn. Dan untaps and draws. He plays a Marsh Flats as land for turn. He casts a Summoner's Pact. The table immediately stand to attention as Esper and Rhystic trigger. Dan pays for Rhystic and John draws. Summoner's Pact resolves and Dan searches up a Derevi, Imperial Tactician. He casts Derevi. Rhystic triggers and Tyler draws. John responds with a Force of Will, paying a life and exiling Mockingbird as an alternate cost. Rhystic triggers and Tyler draws. Dan pays a life and cracks his Marsh Flats, fetching up a Tundra. He then casts Swan Song, targeting Force. Rhystic triggers and Tyler draws. Tyler responds with a Flusterstorm, with all copies targeting Swan Song. Swan Song is countered, and then Force counters Derevi. Saddened with this turn of events, Dan goes to combat. He swings Najeela and his warrior at John. Najeela triggers twice to make 1/1 warriors, tapped and attacking John. John takes the damage, and Dan passes. Cammy untaps and draws. She plays a Blinkmoth Nexus as land for turn. Cammy casts Voice of Victory. The table get an uneasy look as Rhystic triggers. Cammy pays for Rhystic, and Voice resolves. Cammy goes to combat, swinging Serra Ascendant at Dan. He takes the damage, and Cammy passes the turn. John untaps and draws. He goes to combat, swinging Ragavan at Tyler. Tyler takes the damage, and Ragavan triggers to make a treasure and exile Wooded Foothills off the top of Tyler's library. John sheds a single tear at all the lands in his opponent's deck, and the total lack of them in his hand. In his second main phase, John exiles Simian Spirit Guide from his hand for a red to cast Underworld Breach. Rhystic triggers and Tyler draws. Priority slowly passes around, and Underworld Breach resolves. John taps Bloom Tender for 3 mana and spends 1 to cast a Silence. Rhystic triggers and Tyler draws. Kami responds with a Swords to Plowshares, targeting Esper Sentinel to give Tyler a draw. Esper and Rhystic trigger. Tyler and John draw. Esper is then exiled and John gains a life. John casts a Gamble. He searches up a card in hand and then randomly discards Angel's Grace. John casts Lion's Eye Diamond. Rhystic triggers and Tyler draws. LED resolves and John casts Gamble from his grave, exiling 3 cards. Rhystic triggers and Tyler draws. Gamble resolves and John searches up a card in hand and randomly discards Mindbreak Trap. John cracks LED for 3 blue and uses 2 to escape Brain Freeze from his grave, exiling 3 other cards. Rhystic triggers and Tyler draws. Brain Freeze and all of its Storm copies mill John for a total of 21 cards. John presents a loop of casting Lion's Eye Diamond to make mana and spending it on Brain Freeze to mill out almost his entire library. Tyler draws a boatload of cards with Rhystic on the way, but under Silence, John isn't concerned. John now shows his win. He escapes Displacerkin from his grave. It resolves, and John then escapes Eternal Witness from his grave. Witness enters and triggers to return Lotus Petal to John's hand. John casts Lotus Petal. Displacer Kitten triggers to flicker Eternal Witness. Witness enters and triggers to add Lightning Bolt to hand. John cracks his Petal for a red and casts Lightning Bolt targeting Tyler. Kitten triggers to flicker Witness. Witness triggers to return Lotus Petal to hand. John now presents a loop of casting Lotus Petal and Lightning Bolt over and over, pinging each opponent with Bolt until they're all dead. With that, John wins the game. Today, we have a 2-for-1 deal. In this game, Kami is playing Kefka, Court Mage. This is a Grixis mid-range deck pretending to be a hand disruption deck. This deck can generate massive card advantage through Kefka before winning with Thassa's Oracle or Underworld Breach. Her hand contains a Soul Ring, Red Elemental Blast, Mindbreak Trap, Talion the Kindly Lord, Mana Confluence, and Luxury Suite. Her London Mulligan is a Flusterstorm. John is again playing Omnath, Locus of Creation. His hand contains Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer, Chain of Vapor, Relic of Legends, Gemstone Caverns, and Polluted Delta. His London Mulligans are Chrome Mox and Hullbreaker Horror. Tyler's playing Rograk, Son of Roga, and Silas Wren, Seeker Adept. This is the fastest deck in the format. It uses Rograk to its highest potential, blazing out Grixis-flavored wins as early as turn 1 or 2. His hand contains a Rite of Flame, Vampiric Tutor, Demonic Consultation, Bloodstained Mire, Flooded Strand, Scalding Tarn, and Undercity Sewers. Dan is again playing Najeela, the Blade Blossom. His hand contains Ragavan Nimble Pilferer, Orcish Bowmasters, and Tarnished Citadel. His 4 London Mulligans are Deflecting Swat, Red Elemental Blast, Misty Rainforest, and Volcanic Island. Sometimes it is what it is. And with that, let's see some value plays. John has a pre-game action, putting a Gemstone Caverns onto the battlefield, exiling Chain of Vapor. Kami then starts things off with a Luxury Suite as land for turn. She casts a Soul Ring. Kami passes the turn. John untaps and draws. He plays a Polluted Delta as land for turn. John casts a Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer. He then passes the turn. Tyler plays Bloodstained Mire as land for turn. He casts his command, Rograk, Son of Roga. Tyler then passes the turn. Dan plays a Windswept Heath as land for turn. He pays a life and cracks it, and Tyler responds by paying a life and cracking his Bloodstained Mire, determined to fetch before Dan has Opposition Agent mana. Hearing that, John responds by paying a life and cracking his Polluted Delta, fetching up a Volcanic Island. Tyler fetches up an Underground Sea, and then Dan fetches up a Taiga. Dan casts Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer. He then passes the turn. Kami untaps and draws. She plays a Wooded Foothills as land for turn. She pays a life and cracks it, fetching up a Volcanic Island. She taps out to cast a Talion, the Kindly Lord. It enters and Kami names 2. Kami then passes the turn. John untaps and draws. He goes straight to combat, swinging Ragavan at Tyler. He takes the damage and Ragavan triggers to get a counter and exile Windfall off the top of Tyler's library. John really doesn't like his hand, but is very hesitant to give the Rog side player a free new hand. Tyler says to make it easier, he has 2 tutors in hand. John puts the Windfall on the stack, seeing that as a good reason to get rid of some cards. Tyler responds with a Vampiric Tutor. John realizes what he's done as Vamp Tutor resolves. Tyler searches up a card at the top of his library and loses 2 life. Windfall then resolves, and each player discards their hand and draws 6. Notably, Dan discards Orcish Bowmasters here. The table wipe the sweat from their foreheads as they avoid certain death. John plays a Stomping Grounds for turn, into play untap, paying 2 life. John then passes the turn. Tyler untaps and draws. He casts a Mox Amber. He plays Misty Rainforest as land for turn. He pays life and cracks it, fetching up a Badlands. This is not a legal fetch, but no one cared to notice. He casts Dark Ritual. It resolves and he has 3 black mana. Tyler puts an Ad Nauseam on the stack. Priority passes around and John shows off his new fun hand, casting Mindbreak Trap. Mindbreak Trap exiles Ad Naus, and Tyler has to pass the turn. Dan untaps and draws. He plays a Scrubland as land for turn. Dan casts an Esper Sentinel. Tyler is determined not to let anyone have card advantage and pays 2 life from Mental Misstep, countering Esper Sentinel. Dan then goes to combat, swinging Ragavan at Tyler. Tyler takes the damage and Ragavan triggers to make a treasure and exile Force of Will off the top of Tyler's library. In his second main phase, Dan casts Mana Vault. He then passes the turn. Cammy untaps and draws. She looks bewildered at the total lack of cards Talion has drawn her and then plays a command tower as land for turn. She taps out for her commander, Kefka, Court Mage. It enters and triggers. Everyone discards and Cammy gets 2 draws. She then goes to combat, swinging Talion at Dan. Dan takes the damage and Cammy passes the turn. John untaps and draws. He goes to combat and swings Ragavan at Tyler. Tyler protests, as his Ad Nauseam is in exile, and Dan's isn't. John says Tyler's deck is full of good stuff and he wants in on that. Tyler takes the damage and Ragavan triggers to make a treasure in exile, Marsh Flats, off the top of his library. In his second main phase, John casts his commander, Omnath, Locus of Creation. It enters and triggers to draw a card. John then passes the turn. Tyler untaps and draws. He casts an Underworld Breach. Talion triggers to draw and ping Tyler for 2. Priority slowly passes around and John steps in again, casting Force of Negation, pitching Teferi, Time Raveler, as an additional cost. Tyler is gobsmacked that John has the answer again. He casts a Lotus Petal and then passes the turn, totally hellbent, daring Kefka to try. Dan untaps and draws. He casts Samut, Vizier of Noctimoon. Talion triggers to draw and ping him for 2. He goes to combat and swings Ragavan and Samut at Tyler. Tyler takes the damage and Samut and Ragavan trigger. Dan makes a treasure and exiles Final Fortune off the top of Tyler's library. He then draws for Samut. Dan opts to hold up mana and pass the turn. Cammy untaps and draws. She plays a Blood Crypt into play untapped, paying 2 life. She casts a Harmonic Prodigy. The table quiet down as they start to get concerned. Cammy casts a Volatile Storm Drake. It enters and triggers, changing control with Samut. She pays 3 energy to keep it. Cammy then casts Douthy Voidwalker. The table strap in for a pretty bad combat. Cammy goes to combat, swinging Kefka at John and Talion at Dan. Kefka triggers twice through Harmonic Prodigy. The first ability resolves and everyone discards into the Douthy pile and Cammy draws 3. The second ability resolves and everyone discards into the Douthy zone again and Cammy draws 3 more. Dan and John then take the damage. Cammy then passes the turn, discarding to hand size. John untaps and draws. He goes to combat, begging Dan to have removal on top of his library. He swings Ragavan at Dan. Dan takes the damage and Ragavan triggers to make a treasure and exile Bloodstained Mire off the top of his library. In his second main phase, John casts Displacer Kitten. Talion triggers to draw and deal 2 to him. He then passes the turn. Tyler untaps and draws. He casts his other commander, Silas Wren, Seeker Adept. Talion triggers and Cammy draws and deals 2 to him. He then passes the turn, resigned to his fate. Dan untaps and draws. He goes into the tank, deciding how best to navigate the current problem. He says he could really do something if he could get some mana. Dan goes to combat and swings Ragavan at Tyler. Tyler takes the damage and Ragavan triggers to make a treasure and exile Paradise Mantle off the top of his library. In his second main phase, Dan casts Paradise Mantle. He equips Paradise Mantle to his Storm Drake. He taps Drake for a black mana and then casts Diabolic Intent, sacrificing Volatile Storm Drake as an additional cost. Talion triggers to ping him for 2 and draw. Diabolic Intent resolves and goes to the Douthy zone. The table begged Dan to get Toxic Deluge, as he just gave the Douthy pile a win. He says he'll deal with things as he searches up his card. Dan then casts Thassa's Oracle. Talion triggers to draw and ping Dan for 2, as the table suddenly pucker up. All eyes go to Cammy as she passes priority. Thassa resolves and enters, triggering. Dan holds priority and casts Demonic Consultation. Everyone looks longingly at Cammy and her massive hand, but she passes priority. Consultation resolves and Dan names Emrakul, the Promised End. He exiles his whole library, not finding it. Thassa's Oracle's trigger then resolves, and with that, Dan wins the game. So, what did we learn today? Always be third. If you put the first 2 attempts on the stack, John will counter it. If you have any tips for the video, leave them below. Subscribe if you feel like it. Until next time, keep making value plays.
I think Ragavan and Esper at you, Dan.
Thanks, so.
Yeah, I'll swing Ragavan at you. Cards are also better.
They sure are.
Sorry. Just had a stroke. I'll swing 2 at you.
Dude, Dan's got better card
I
quality
think-
than my random nonsense.
I don't want his shit, okay?
What do you mean you don't
I don't want
this?
mana dorks. I
You
want
got, like Ristic
I
Study?
want neck
No,
rolls
I
and
don't
shit.
got blue cards.
Give me something good.
Yep.
Damn it. Damn
Take
it.
2. I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah, flip it.
Man.
God,
I needed that land.
damn it.
Damn it.
What's everyone's thoughts on that? On the windfall?
And does that... Tyler is turbo.
I'm
He
always
probably wants to
happy
be
to see
Yeah, I
will
guess.
happen. If it helps your decision, I have 2 tutors in my hand. So, the world's my oyster at the moment.
Windfall.
Yep. I'll vamp tutor. I told you I had 2 tutors in my hand.
You did say that. Which
I didn't know they
is
were
kinda
that.
funny.
Here's a Nos.
I got nothing.
Yeah, you wheeled me out of all my good stuff.
That's fine. I wheeled into mine break track.
Wow, he had it. Okay.
Nice.
Dude, I kind of forgot that you were blue. I looked and saw Stomping Ground and then Cave
Yeah.
and a Ragavan. I'm like, okay, he doesn't play blue. I don't know
Yeah.
why I didn't like. I think I looked at your land that was up and I was like,
Yeah.
not blue. I'm chilling.
Don't care.
Yeah.
Growth.
Breach.
Oh.
Dan, come
I'll
on.
take 2.
No, I don't have anything.
Cammy, come on.
Yes, you wheeled me out of all of my
Christ.
choice.
Why do you always have it, brother?
Pitch to fairy.
It's so
Yeah.
criminal, dude.
I'm-
And it's exiled too.
I'm
So
blue.
beast, so beast, John.
Play this metal and pass. Dude, John, why is it always you? You ruined my life, homie.
Those were both in my 6.
I was like, okay, Nas got canceled. I'm chilling. I'll just try to jam again next turn. Well, I'm hellbent, so fuck Kefka.
You really are.
Yeah.
Whoa. Holy
Yeah,
shit.
I don't do anything ever again, so.
Yeah, I did just cast
Yeah,
out the.
we're so dead.
Get hellbent, boys. Get hellbent.
I'm getting out.
This goes into the.
Alright, so we're definitely losing. Now that you've given Cammy a 2.
Okay. I'm
Alright,
gonna go
good
look for
luck.
a card.
Dan, you're getting deluge.
I think that's probably the best bet, right?
It's gotta be.
But I feel like if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You know.
Stop jamming.
Do you have anything?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we cast Assassin's
That's
Waterfall.
insane. Cammy, blast his ass. He's so irresponsible.
Dan really swooping in on Cammy's dope
Boring it
ass.
into a very fun game.
Dude, Cammy's hand was nuts.
I do feel like I was genuinely like, okay, maybe I should go for Toxic. But then I'm like, well, she either just counters it, and I haven't done anything, or she's
Or
just
she
got the
counters
win
console
in-
and I haven't done anything, but everyone knows that I'm not a team player.
Yeah.
You thought, I like that option.
Right.